Everyone always talks about how to improve your soil. If you feed the soil, you feed the plants. Well, today I'm going to talk about the one way that I absolutely love feeding the soil, and it's super easy, and that's going to be a cover crop. A cover crop is typically a plant that you grow that is mainly designed to improve the soil and not necessarily to eat. I like to grow cover crops that do both, and there's pros and cons with that. But let's talk about what a cover crop is. Typically, people choose plants for cover cropping that are grown outside of their traditional season. So for those in the north, that's going to be maybe very early in the spring season before the ground has really gotten warm enough for those nice warm weather plants that we love. But down here in the south, in Florida, where I live, we don't like to grow during the summer, so we cover crop during the summer. You can, of course, cover crop at different times of the year, whenever you want. There's no hard and fast rule for that, but you don't necessarily want it to interfere with your growing time when you're actually producing food. The main cover crops that I like to use in my garden, and this is mainly for folks down in the south here, this is going to be this crazy beast behind here. This is 2 plants. There is only 2 plants in this spot right here, and it is taking up this whole bed and this whole A-framed trellis that I have that you can no longer see because it is huge, and that is cowpeas. Cowpeas are these beans right here. They're a black-eyed pea. They come in so many different varieties. This one specifically is a Puerto Rican black bean. It is in the cowpea family, but tastes, behaves exactly like a black bean, and it's actually what I feed my family as black beans rather than traditional black beans. Now, another type of cover crop I like that is edible is going to be sweet potatoes. The cowpeas do provide some nitrogen fixing elements to the benefit of your soil, whereas the sweet potatoes aren't necessarily going to do that, but they do offer a lot of other benefits that cover crops give, and they're edible. Some other ones that I like to grow are going to be sorghum and millet. Now, those technically you could grow to eat, but traditionally people grow them and cut them down before they get to the stage of producing their grain. And then my other really favorite one, I love it. I'm not growing it this year, but I usually grow it every summer, is sun hemp. Sun hemp doesn't really produce any food at all. It is strictly a cover crop, but it produces probably the highest amount of nitrogen that you can get in a cover crop, and we're going to talk about how that benefits your soil in just a moment. Another one that people like to use down here in the south is going to be marigolds. Once again, it's kind of like the sweet potatoes. It's not going to help you with the nitrogen fixing element, but because we have such sandy soil here, we get something called root knot nematodes. They love to live in sandy soil, and they basically annihilate plants. Kills them at the root level, and there's not a whole lot you can do other than try to enrich the soil to where the nematodes don't want to live there. And marigold does that. It repels them and it kind of pushes them out. A lot of people will plant an entire area of marigolds as a way to reduce their root knot nematode problems during the summer. If you're up north, you might grow something like winter wheat, winter rye, field peas, oats, clover, or hairy vetch. I hear that those are all phenomenal crops that you can grow, and a lot of the times you can grow them in colder weather so that you could do it early in the spring, or you could do it in part of your fall and winter garden. Now let's talk about the benefits of growing a cover crop, because this is what they're known for. They're known for improving the soil. So how do they do that? So the first thing that a cover crop does is it helps maintain soil structure. So if you have absolutely nothing, and I'm going to focus this mainly on my southern gardeners here, if during the summer you decide that you don't want to grow because it's way too hot down here to be growing or being out here and tending to a garden, and the plants don't like it, they don't love to live in our hot 100-degree temperature summers or with all the humidity. A lot of the times we will leave our soil bare. The problem with leaving it bare is the evaporation that occurs. The life that's happening underneath the soil is going to die out because there's not moisture. There's not anything for them to eat there. So by having a plant in the ground, you are maintaining the soil life. You're maintaining the soil structure. Soil has an entire ecosystem in life that's happening underground. It's basically an entire country or city that's happening for all of these bugs and fungi and all these microorganisms. It's huge. And so if they don't have plants growing, they don't have things that they can eat. They don't have ways to be covered and protected from the hot sun. And so what you start to see is death occurring in the soil. So that's one of the main reasons why we do it. And that soil structure, plants, when they put the roots down into the ground, the roots kind of travel and create these little intersects and highways and all kinds of things under the ground. And it gives all those little microorganisms a place to live and eat. So it's important to have something planted as often and as much as you possibly can. That kind of leads into the moisture retention. This giant beast right here basically provides its own mulch. There is no mulch underneath this bed. There's only 2 plants in here, so they're only taking up this much space. But because this plant creates so much foliage, it's protecting the bottom of the bed from the sun, and it's allowing that moisture, the rain that's coming down, to be protected down there. It doesn't evaporate as much because it is basically covered. It's basically giving it a shade cloth or a patio in there that nothing can get down in there to evaporate off that moisture. Your cover crops are going to also produce a ton of foliage, as you can see here, and that foliage is great for biomass. Biomass simply means that you can refill your beds with organic materials, and that's going to be this right here. Now, yes, you can absolutely cut it down at the base, leave the roots in the ground for that soil structure, and then stick all this foliage in your compost bin. But where I live, our soil sinks very, very quickly. I think it has something to do with the rain and the sand underneath. Everything just kind of sinks down. And the way to fill those beds back up is to use biomass. Sun hemp is really excellent at creating biomass, but so is cowpeas. Clearly, there is a ton here. I could fill up all of my beds from just 1 or 2 beds of cover crop of cowpeas. We talked earlier about how the huge amounts of foliage help maintain the water retention. But another added benefit is it reduces weeds. So if you have a big problem with weeds or maybe grass growing in your beds, putting in a huge cover crop is basically going to suppress the weeds. It's going to suffocate them and choke them out to where they basically can't get any sunlight, and then essentially they die. If you've ever had to pull weeds all the time, trust me, a cover crop is where it's at, because I have grown cover crops for many years now, and it has virtually solved my weed problem. I don't want to say perfectly, because I still do get weeds, especially in the early part of spring, but by the time summer rolls around, I get no weeds. In all my fall plantings, no weeds. Definitely a game changer for weeding. Nitrogen is probably one of the biggest reasons why I cover crop. Where I live, there's a lot of rain and a lot of leaching, so I lose a lot of nutrients no matter how much I'm adding back to the garden and how much biomass and organic material and mulch and I'm adding, and even fertilizer. We leach nutrients so quickly here in our sandy soil with all this rain and humidity. So putting natural nitrogen back into the soil is paramount. It's such a big deal for me. Not all cover crops do this. Like sweet potatoes don't necessarily do this, marigolds don't, but anything in that legume family, the peas, the beans, some of the grains like the sorghums and the millets and the winter rye and the oats and those kinds of things, they fix the nitrogen in the soil. And basically what that means is as the plant grows and it's producing its foliage, it is pushing nitrogen out through its roots into the soil. Now, the thing you have to be aware of when you grow your cover crop like I do, like these cowpeas, where I allow them to flower and produce seed, means that it's going to start using some of that nitrogen to produce its flowers and its seeds. So I'm not going to get as much nitrogen from something like this as I would if I would have chopped it down immediately before it started flowering. So if you're really going for the nitrogen element, you want to cut your cover crop down before the flowers start forming and before you start getting, seed pods or the grain from the mullets and the sorghums and things. The highest nitrogen producing plant that I know of is sun hemp, and that's one of the reasons I love it. I grew sun hemp in these 2 beds actually last summer, and I chopped it all down. I used it as a mulch, and that sun hemp produced so much nitrogen that when I put my fall crop of broccoli and cabbages down, I didn't need to fertilize it all during fall, which was really amazing. It was naturally fertilized. And probably the last really cool thing that a cover crop does is it provides a wildlife habitat. I'm a little less excited about this just because whenever I come out here, there's constantly like bugs. I can see a very giant lizard right there. I found loober grasshoppers. Gregory the garden snake is probably hiding somewhere in here. In fact, we saw a second Gregory, so we saw two different snakes. This one's much smaller, and he's somewhere in here. So not my favorite reason for having it, but it does create biodiversity. It creates ecosystem. It creates all the things that make having a garden much easier. If you don't want to deal with pests or treating for pests or disease, having all of these organisms and animals and pests and bugs and stuff in here actually help. Even though the bad pests are attracted to these cover crops, it creates a habitat for them, and then what happens is it creates a lot of bad pests. But that attracts the good pests. And you want the good pests in your garden because they are the ones that are going to keep the population of the bad pests down. I don't worry much about pest control at all now because I have this balance in the garden where my good pests have shown up because I've given a place for the bad pests to hang out, and then the good pests come to eat the bad pests. And that's just less I have to do. And it's fun to come out here and see the different animals and to see the birds coming down and to see the butterflies flying around. And I've now got these big fat honeybees, I think they are, the yellow and black striped ones that are really fuzzy and furry and big. They're so fun to watch, and it's just a great environment for them to hang out in. So you might be wondering, when is the right time to plant your cover crop? Here in the south where I'm at, I plant it around June or July. As my spring plants, like tomatoes, start to peter out and they're not producing flowers anymore, or the flowers aren't pollinating because it's too hot, I'll rip those plants out and immediately put in some sort of cover crop, like the cowpeas, the sun hemp, sorghum, millet, marigolds, sweet potatoes, whatever you have. And then I grow that all the way until the temperatures at night start to adjust. And that usually happens around September-ish. So in late September, you'll start to see the temperatures at night going in that 70-degree range to that 60-degree range, depending on where you are at in Florida, or if you're in the other southern parts of the states like Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, all you guys. So when you start to see those temperatures at night start to even dip into the 60s, like 69, 68, 67, that's when you can start clearing out your cover crops. Now, if you're up north, you actually have two different times that you can do it. I'm not super familiar with this, but I do know that you can grow them like early in the spring before your ground has really gotten as warm as it needs to be for things like tomatoes and peppers. Or another option, which sounded pretty appealing to me if I were living up north, would be to grow them in fall. So after you've done your entire spring and summer planting and you're starting to wind down and you're getting a little tired of gardening and harvesting and preserving, putting down a cover crop for fall when you're not really growing anything else is an excellent idea. Then what you have to do is you don't even really need to chop it down if you don't want to. Wait for winter to come, it will kill off the plant, and then you can kind of press it down right before spring. So these are all the reasons why I love cover cropping my garden beds. It is great for the soil. In my case, it's producing some food. All around, just a really good idea. So definitely check it out. Thanks for hanging out with me today and talking all about cover cropping. I had so much fun with you. Happy gardening, guys.